Hi, it's Global Politics with Jim Martin. The assassination of Charlie Kirk brought to mind a little bit of history for me, and I wanted to bring that and some statistics to the table to maybe provide some common sense about all of this. First off, political violence and political murders, are rare. Since 1975, a total of 3,600 people, more or less. That's about 0.3% of the murders in the United States during that time. The vast majority of those deaths occurred on 9/11. Those that remain, when you take those out, represent 0.07% of US murders since 1975. Everybody matters. Every one of those deaths is somebody's son, father, mother, child. So I'm not trying to dismiss any of those. However, in a day-to-day sense, it's incredibly rare for there to be political violence that results in someone's death in this country. Second, political violence and murders matter. They capture the attention of nearly everyone and consume a tremendous amount of media space. Furthermore, they tend to attract a lot of attention from political leaders who respond with policy, and we'll talk about that a bit later. Next, political murders since 1975 have mostly been committed by right-wing folks. Again, if you take out the 9/11 attacks. During the span of time, there were 391 murders that can be firmly attributed to individuals that ascribe to right-wing ideologies. However, the majority of these deaths occurred in two incidents: the Pulse nightclub attack and the Oklahoma City bombing. Those represent 49 and 168 deaths, respectively. Next, leftist folks murder people too. Again, excluding 9/11, there have been about 65 politically motivated murders that can be ascribed to folks with left-wing motivations since 1975. Next, political violence isn't new to the United States. In our early history, there were frequent duels between political rivals. Perhaps the most famous one, Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton's infamous 1804 duel. In the early 1900s, anarchists aligned with the Black Hand movement and others committed many acts of political violence, including the shooting of President McKinley, the bombing of Wall Street, various bombings in urban areas across the United States. Of course, in the 60s and 70s, organizations like the Weather Underground bombed military recruiting centers, banks, and other government-aligned buildings. At the time, they would call in the threat ahead of time, and there were many, many false threats called in as well. There were thousands of bombings during the late 60s and until about 1975 or so. However, due to the nature of these threats and calling them in ahead of time, deaths and injuries were rare, but not non-existent. Also during the 60s and 70s, the Ku Klux Klan and other white supremacist groups attacked minority groups, civil rights demonstrations, and also engaged in deadly bombings that resulted in many deaths. I witnessed one such attack on my desegregated school in Maryland in 1975. No one died, but the school burnt to the ground. During the 80s and 90s, separatist and white supremacist groups also engaged in several bank robberies and murders, primarily in the Pacific Northwest, but also elsewhere. We also had the Oklahoma City bombing during this time. The results: despite the rarity of political violence, every episode attracts the attention of powerful political institutions and everyone else. The ability of the government to legally surveil, detain, and jail individuals has grown, I would say, exponentially since the early 1900s. These powers, often initially focused on specific groups, are then used and morphed to investigate other purported crimes or individuals that do not have a political motive. These powers often infringe on the constitutional rights of average citizens, pushing those boundaries at each step. Governments don't give up powers that they've acquired unless they are forced to do so. To that end, political violence and murders may actually create and reinforce the sort of state that perpetrators were allegedly fighting against in their often crazed and unhinged attacks. The crackdowns launched by the FBI, local police, state police, and other institutions of the state are often very consequential and have long timelines. Consider what happened to the Black Panthers or the student protesters at Kent State as examples of what kinds of things can happen. I look forward to your comments. Keep them civil. If you enjoy my content, please subscribe, and I look forward to talking to you again very soon. Thanks.